ahead and welcome you to the museum. As I said, my name is Fred Bell. If I can have you rise. Are we ready?
Oh, can you see by the dawn's early light?
From VA 82, the Marauders. I'd like to invite up Captain Eric Jensen.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's really good to see you coming out today. This is a real special day for me and for our squad. So Larry O'Brien worked tirelessly on the aircraft restoration. This project was a fairly daunting thing because he knew nothing about our squadron or any of the past history that was happening. He kind of started from scratch. So over time, Captain Shed Webster and I worked with Larry, trying to find old pictures to have as much authenticity as we possibly could to the squadron colors and the design and the paint job of our airplane. So with a lot of painstaking work, history began to be unfolded, and the airplane that you see before you is dressed out in the Attack Squadron 82 colors that is the same that we flew with in Vietnam. So good job, Larry. It was nice working with you. As part of the restoration crew, as you know that it takes a lot of people to make something like this happen, and I can't think of a better crew than the one that put this together here at the museum. And I know Shed and I truly feel like we're part of the family already. I'd also like to acknowledge Commander Walt Mosier. He lives on the East Coast, and he made 2 cruises to Vietnam and was one of the pilots that flew this particular aircraft. He's represented today by Jim Wade and his wife Jamie, and they're here today. Walt was a passionate member of VA 82. And I called him this morning and I said, hey, check your logbook and let's see if you have any authenticity here. So we checked his logbook and he found that he personally flew 18 combat missions over Laos and Vietnam in the airplane that you see here today. Walt and Larry actually are the bedrock of the project. That somehow Walt had heard about the A-7 and somehow he and Larry got together. And all of a sudden, history started to unfold, and this airplane and its history all of a sudden had meaning and depth and purpose. So, Shed and Doug and I are here today, more or less representing all the other squadron mates that flew in VA 82. Some of them have passed on, some are still alive. Most of them that I flew with live on the East Coast, and it was a little more difficult for them to arrive today. But we're here representing everybody that flew in Vietnam in our squadron. I believe that the Palm Springs Air Museum dedication to aviation history is because of one single fact, and that is that our stories matter. And if they haven't been here doing what they're doing, those stories would all be lost in time. All the aircraft you see in this museum represent where we have been and are a part of the foundation of where we are going. They played an important part of our past because they represented all that is really good about America. They were created to stand in harm's way, defend you and me in our history. More importantly, as these aircraft have been carefully preserved, what is missing is the individual stories of the pilots who flew them. It took the man and the machine to come together to be an effective force. Time works its ravages, and in a lot of cases, most of the other planes in this museum have outlived the men who flew them. The 3 of us are here today to hopefully make this A-7's history come more alive for you. Aviation history in this museum is an accumulation of what's gone before, and without that history, there would never be a today. So today, in many ways, is the story of our own living history. In our case, history is what we have seen and what we have personally experienced. It is what we have lived and touched with our own hands. It represents life lived and made manifest simply because we were there and we were the ones who lived it. It is our hope that we can connect our stories with the A-7 that you see here today. On a side note, there's always a friendly competition between the Navy and the Air Force. And the Air Force also flew the A-7 later in the production runs. And the Air Force called the A-7 SLUF, S-L-U-F, which represented short little ugly fellow. And at first it seems like a bit of a slap if you flew the A-7. But the reason they did that was because the A-7 didn't have the sleek lines of the fighter, and they didn't have the giant mass of their big bombers. So it kind of was a little bit of a niche, but it was fantastic Navy aircraft. A-7A, Bureau number 152675, just happens to be the very aircraft I flew my first combat mission from the aircraft carrier USS Corsair in Vietnam. That date was the 28th of October, 1969. And showing my age, that was 52 years ago, if you're not good at math. Captain Webster and Captain Brock also flew this airplane one time or another that year. And for a time it represented America, it represented you, and it represented me. And because of our age, it was time for us to step forward and do our part for our country that was at war in Southeast Asia. It has found a new home here in the Palm Springs Air Museum and has been rescued from being lost to history. We've had a personal relationship with this airplane, so in a way, its story is also our story. This was a magnificent machine in its time. It replaced the A-4 Skyhawk airplane as the Navy's carrier-based primary light attack jet. Amazingly, this little airplane could carry almost its own weight in fuel and ordnance. It was also one of the first Navy jets to use a turbofan engine, which, to us pilots' demise, made it more difficult to land in an aircraft carrier. And that's all we needed was an airplane that was more difficult to land in our home. The A-7 was very versatile. Besides its primary mission of being a bomber, our standard load in Vietnam was 10 500-pound bombs. It could also be configured as an airborne tanker, and it was used several times to refuel other aircraft airborne. It was used to duel with surface-to-air missiles in Vietnam. A mission called Iron Hand called for the airplane to be flown as bait to ferret out the missile sites in North Vietnam so they could be defeated with the Shrike homing missiles. That was always an interesting flight. On the carrier, launching was by one of the ship's 4 catapults. Heavily loaded, the airplane was accelerated from 0 to 150 miles an hour in 2 to 3 seconds flight. The interesting thing is from the pilot's standpoint, it would literally squat off the bow when the catapult let go. And we would kiddingly say, while it made up its mind to fly, it would be run over by 65,000 tons of ship. That was the most exciting part of the day. It's my pleasure now to introduce Captain Chip Webster, who is my roommate at Corsair. And he's going to try and relate about what flying combat missions in the A-7 is like.
Good afternoon. I have a question for, are there any retired people in the audience besides the individuals? Show of hands. For those that can't see, that's probably 20% of the people out here. That's impressive. Thank you very much for your service. And hopefully the generations in the future, as Eric noticed, the numbers are decreasing that are serving. Keep getting your neighbors killed. Help support the country. So what I'm going to try to do is a little bit different than what Eric did. So, just from my background, pretty much the same. But my wife Pam and I were married before we went to the Coral Sea. So she spent all 26 years with me and our kids, all of them are here, plus 2 of our grandkids. So they served the military from the shore side while we were at sea. And that's an important aspect to everybody who's in the military, remember that. The first squadron I went to was VA-82, and I'd flown a total of 11 flights in this aircraft, 7 in the squadron in Vietnam. Well, what did we do? Eric gave us some names of what it is. We flew at day, we flew at night. Typically, when you fly an airplane for a long period of time, you fly about 33% of your flight at night, and the other 67 during the day. Well, in Vietnam, it wasn't that way. 45% of our flights were at night, and that's almost half of your flights are at night, and the other half are in the day. And the cycles we flew, it's not like you get up in the morning, you go for a flight. It was a 12-hour flying day. Some of them started at 8 a.m. and ended at 1600. That was probably 4 days in the cruise. The other one started at about 1600 at night, 6 p.m., and ended at 6 a.m. Or some of them at midday, it just went for about half a day. You leave at 9 in the morning and finish up about 10 at night, the last sort. But any way you look at it, there's a lot of nighttime, a lot of different things that are flown. So for what we did, Eric mentioned briefly bombing. I think we've all seen that in movies or something like that. Search and rescue, looking for people that went missing. Going out, looking around along the borderline where the pilots went down, over land, over sea. Test stops, you've got to check your airplane before we send it out on a mission. Afterwards, had maintenance. And there's this thing called spare. For every time we had a sortie, say 2 airplanes, there was a 3rd airplane manned up, ready to go if one of the first 2 airplanes went down. That means you had 50% more people on the flight deck for regular missions. Or you had 1 spare for 4 airplanes if you had multiple blocks. Did that make sense? Okay. So we're going to go now to a typical combat sortie mission. And they all start and end about the same way, hopefully. That you have your brief, that's about an hour and 15 minutes. Then you get out and man your aircraft, check the maintenance log, climb up on the flight deck, get to your airplane, that's about 15 minutes. Then you sit there waiting for the air boss to say, get everybody's attention on the flight deck and get them started up. And that takes another 10 minutes and you're taxiing up to the cap. Now, taxiing, you know what that means, that's the airplane like they're doing out there, just moving on their own power. Well, on a carrier, you can't move until somebody, a yellow shirt, one of the enlisted guys, moves you around the deck, gets you to the cap, and guide you, and you get locked into the arresting gear. And physically, you get locked in. When that happens, that launch shuttle can fire. It doesn't because they haven't told you to go to power, and you get this wind-up signal from a yellow shirt right down here. You go to full power, check all your instruments, everything's there, and if it looks good to you, you salute the launch officer. He's the guy who's sitting down there, he's sitting like this, just saying, spinning up his, and he looks around and makes sure the cat's good, puts his arm down. The next thing you know, you're doing 150 knots 2 seconds later at the end of the runway. And if you do drag racing, well, we didn't know how to do that either, but when that airplane fires, you're doing 150 knots 200 and some odd feet later. That's kind of fast. So the first thing you're doing is trying to get your eyes unlocked from wherever they were looking in the back of your head, and you get to fly off. Eric described it, sags and flies. That's the easy part. From there you launch out, you go about 10 miles, then you climb up overhead the ship, you rendezvous, which means join on your lead, or the flight you're with, or whatever it's going to be for the day. And you proceed on to the target with your lead, changing radio frequencies. We go from the ship to an airborne command post to a FAC, a forward air controller, would deal with us. And from there you conduct your mission, recover up, come back, and wait above the carrier at 20 miles out and stacked up. You take 60-second interval, go back and land. That's every mission. So beside that, there are a few things we did when we were out there. And I wanted to give you a little bit about those. And I picked 4 different missions that were totally different from each other. Not in the blood war or anything like that, but just what is happening in the airplane, what the pilot's doing, and what you're trying to get accomplished. The typical one that would go as a 2-plane strike, or it could be 4-plane. That's 2 sections, the 2 flying together. or it could be an alpha strike, which is anywhere from 20 to 35 airplanes, all going airborne, all going at the same time and attacking a single target within about 90-second minute. Think how many airplanes that is, where they're going in, how they're doing everything, get it coordinated. But going to that area and coming back is basically the same for every flight. On a flight in Vietnam, when we were there weren't too many SAMs, which is the missiles, the big ones you see. They're there, but there weren't too many. Our first few months there, it was small bullets, 23 millimeter, 57s that came up with, and 100 millimeter rounds. That's all from the leg. And just that single, triple, 23 millimeter sight, it had 4 barrels for our engine. You had a series of 4, 7, 8 sights in one target area if it was a hot target area. Or you may go someplace where there are no enemy on the ground. But each one of these weapons had a different, distinct impact, because they could impact it. They could hit your airplane, flip you over. Those things all happened to many of us. But we're still here, so that's good. The airplane, this is a good thing, brought us back. In the bombing run, for any of those missions, anything we did, basically you're going around in a circle one way or the other, and you're going to roll into the target. The first aircraft's going to roll in, and usually nothing happens. Then the second one rolls in, then the third one. Well, about the second or the third one, the gunners had the idea. And all of a sudden you see red tracers coming up, or white tracers, or great big ones that just go bang. At your altitude, depending on what it is. That could be anywhere from 3,000 feet to 5,000 foot to the 10,000 foot range. But they're all controlled by radar and people down there on the ground. So what you don't want to see is, if I'm flying right at the target right there, and I see bullets coming this way, guess who's in the middle? That's the airplane. So we're trying not to stay in that position, but it can happen at any time, and it did. It does for all the different calibers. That is, you get out of the way and continue your mission. Continue on, but that happens. So that's what any aircraft looks like. One of the strangest ones I ever experienced with one of the other pilots, we were flying in, I think it was May of 70, and we're at 20,000 foot, all our lights are off, we're flying a half mile apart, but it's full of the moon. And we're just cruising along, not talking to anybody, and right between us, quarter mile apart, 100 millimeter round, goes off right between the airplanes at the same elevation. It didn't hit anybody. But think what would have happened if we'd been flying together. Which is why we have different tactics when we're flying, so that the enemy can't really hit you unless they can see where you are, what you're doing, what it's all about. But you can't be lazy. So you don't fly straight level when you're doing it, you're moving around, but you're keeping about the same place so they can't hit you at it. In daylight, one of the missions that was most surprising to me was Corsair support with the Marines against the North Vietnamese regulars just south of the DMZ. And if you take this line between this side of the audience and that, the South Vietnamese and Americans are here, and the North Vietnamese are there, and in the middle, there's 200 yards. And they're shooting at each other, and the North Vietnamese are going across. They asked us to come in and strafe down the middle. You start at about 1,500 feet, you pull off at 800. Now you know the left side's not shooting at you, but the right one is. It's an interesting situation. It's something that happens for all the gentlemen and ladies who was here. All those that have done it in combat, it happens, it's just something you do. But that's one that gets your attention, because you can see the tracers going by from one side. You see people waving at you from the other. But you only make 1 or 2 of those runs and somebody else comes in. But that's another one you might go. The big strikes are nothing but a combination of everything else. As you heard, strike missiles, the long-range missiles going out to shut down the missiles, airplanes coming in from different low altitude, high-speed bombers going to blow up things as you're getting while the aircraft up on top are diving in. That's just amazing things happening, everybody rendezvousing, and everybody getting back to that same recovery on the ship. But that's an overview of what the missions were like, the basic ones. I didn't talk about test pilots or coming back in those missions. There's one, just to let you know how friendly the skies are there. I had a hydraulic power that puts the gear down, moves the flaps, does your flight controls. PC-2 fighter, not in this airplane, but another one. And I had to abort the flight and land in Da Nang in South Vietnam. So that means you don't have much flight control. You can't pitch the aircraft, you can't raise your gear, and I had 10 bombs up. I couldn't get rid of it. So I turned on the throttle, which is nice, just coming on, and all of a sudden tracers started coming on. They had AAA inside the last 5 miles to the runway. Luckily, the Air Force had one of their gunships up. It came around and made one pass by that guy, never fired again. I landed with no brakes, no steering, into the arresting gear, the airplane stopped. It was a happy ending. That's why we all support all the services. The Air Force wasn't there, we wouldn't have gotten back. Go any way you want to look at it. So all of you that served, whichever service it was, thank you. And that's my story. If you have any questions for more details, see me afterwards. We'll be here for a while.
I reported VA-82 on the 8th of March, 1969. Came right from the A-7 rag, so I was completely current. 3 days later, I'm on the flight schedule for my first hop with the squadron. And guess which airplane it was? This one right here. When I lifted off the runway, I was officially a Marauder pilot. Young Lieutenant Brott, top of the world. Good as it got. And I had really pushed hard to come to this squadron. It had a great reputation, had a bunch of combat veterans from their American crews, and I knew a lot of the replacement pilots that were coming out of the rag with me. So I was very comfortable with that. So what happened was I get to 82, and I find out, in truth, we were flying the most modern airplane on the decks of the U.S. carriers, A-7 Corsair II. As Eric pointed out, we carried twice the bomb load of the A-4, or we could carry the same bomb load twice as far. So it was a quantum leap. The fuel endurance of this airplane was legendary. People used to joke that it made gas. We could stay airborne until you didn't want to fly anymore that day. So what happened was, we got into this airplane on the deck of the flight deck, or on the carrier. First thing we found out was we were way underpowered. The Navy knew that. They were already doing things to improve the situation. It also had a propensity to adjust the steam of the catapult during the launch. Not a good thing. It could cause the airplane to flame out, and it did in some cases. So the solution was, when you went to full power on the catapult, you selected the bleed switch, which reduced your thrust by 1,200 pounds. Also not a good idea. So the engineers said, no, trust us. As soon as the weight comes off the wheels of the airplane, that bleed switch is going to close, and you get that thrust back. The check is in the mail. I can tell you, you had no trouble focusing on a dark night when you were at the end of the catapult stroke, and your climb performance was far less than spectacular. Okay, so we dealt with that. What happened was, as they developed later versions of the airplane, more modern navigation systems, more modern weapon systems, that all culminated in the airplane called the A-7E. And the A-7E was the quintessential model of this aircraft. And it flew from 1971 to 1991 in the Gulf War. It also had a number of firsts. Captain Rosemary Mariner, when she qualified in the A-7E, was the first female aviator, U.S. aviator, to qualify in a tactical jet aircraft. She later commanded an operational squadron. So when we left the Coral Sea, we looked at that era of up to 91. We were the last single-seat, single-engine aircraft on the flight deck for 29 years. Until early this year when the F-35 deployed on the Carl Vinson. So that's a pretty big gap when you think about it. We were kind of looked at by the rest of the air wing as blue-collar aviators. We weren't glamorous, we weren't trying to shoot down other airplanes. If we went supersonic, it was because we made a big mistake. The bottom was, there was nothing romantic about the light attack mission. They called it air to mud. Okay? We didn't wear scarves, and we didn't have tailored flight suits. We actually probably looked more like Larry the Cable Guy. But I can tell you this, the A-7 was an ordnance truck. And when we took off, we knew we could take that ordnance to the target and put it on the target. And that was respected. The forward air controllers loved us because we could show up and hang around for a long time, big variety of weapons, stay there in the area as long as they needed us, and then return. The strike group commanders and the air wing commanders loved us because we could generate more sorties every day than any other airplane in the air wing. And actually, deep in their hearts, the fighter pilots loved us too. When they saw that refueling basket kind of unwinding from that tank A-7, and their low fuel light just came on. So we had our strengths. But the bottom line is, we were a community that was kind of rough and ready. We took the razzing from the air wing in good faith, because the bottom line was we stuck together like glue. We were hard-nosed, we were gritty, we were rough and ready naval aviators, and we took pride in that. So during that 69 and 70 cruise, that marauder spirit kept us going. That was a long cruise, September to June. September 69 to June of 1970. So for me, the significance of this day cannot be overstated. To see this old warrior rescued from the salvage process is just a joy to behold. And when I look at this airplane, I say, now, you know what this means? It means that the men and women who worked and flew this airplane, their children and their grandchildren can come to this museum and stand face to face with this wonderful jet. That means a lot, and it's a great deal. Thank you for saving her for us. We appreciate it. It was a great job. She carried us and many of our squadron mates into combat, and more significantly, brought us home every time. So in closing, what I want to tell you is, in this light attack community of ours, and let's start with the A-1 Skyraider, go to the A-4 Skyhawk, go to the A-7 Corsair 2, we had a mantra that I hope will always live in the annals of naval aviation. Guys, come on up. Are we ready?
Ready.
There is no slack in the light attack.
Gentlemen, to your crews, to your air crews, the maintainers, the United States Navy, and all your families, I salute you. God bless you. There we go. There she is.